Hello and welcome to ESG with Liliana Locke. I'm your host, Liliana. I want to start today's conversation with a simple observation. If you were to take 10 people inside the same company and ask them what ESG actually means for their role, you're going to probably get 10 different answers. This in itself is a risk signal. So today I want to talk about why ESG feels so vague in many organizations and how that vagueness turns into real risk exposure. Before we get into it, here's a quick introduction. I'm Liliana Locke. I help leaders in financial institutions understand their real ESG risks. I've worked with over 300 businesses worldwide to turn uncertainty into defensible decisions. One of the most common issues I see is a lack of shared understanding. It's not a lack of effort, it's just that people are not on the same page within the same organization. And so here's how I want to approach this. First, I want to talk about why ESG feels unclear in the first place. And second, what that lack of clarity looks like in day-to-day operations. Then I want to turn to how these unclear ESG issues turns into risk. And finally, how to create clarity in the first place. So let's start at the beginning. ESG is a very broad term, a very broad container. ESG pulls together environmental topics, social issues, governance expectations, and for many of you, like what even is that? It covers supply chain practices, data and privacy concerns, AI now, and more. Each of these areas has its own standards, language, and professional owners already within a company. The supply chain person is probably not the data person, and they are probably not the privacy governor. When they're grouped together without any structure in the same company, ESG just starts to feel like it's everywhere and nowhere at the same time. People know that it matters. People own different topics, but they're just not sure what ESG risk means for their organization, for their decision making, or even how to think about it within one organization in a holistic way. Another major source of confusion is language. Many companies think that sustainability and ESG are one and the same, and it's not. They're related. Sustainability certainly falls under environmental factors, but ESG has a whole different purpose. The ESG lens is often on risk, and sustainability is often on targets and impact. When sustainability is grouped together with ESG and they're managed as one and the same, teams end up working really hard without really knowing what they're doing. A lot of it gets done, very little gets absorbed into the organization, very little gets kind of processes and responsibilities established throughout the whole organization that manages the enterprise risk. It's really disorganized. This is super common. I don't want to this isn't about blame or anything, but this is what I often see with companies, with the people who I speak to, who manage sustainability or who have ESG risk in their remit. So in many organizations, things that I hear are the fact that, yes, there are established policies, but it's not very clear on who owns them and who updates them and who ensures that they are reported against. There is data, obviously, there's tons of data in an organization, but there's not necessarily one centralized place to review ESG data. And then, therefore, it's not consistently reviewed and it's not consistently validated. There are initiatives, but there's no agreed view on which ones matter the most. How do you prioritize all your ESG initiatives if they're spread across the entire organization, if they're spread across teams? From the outside, yeah, it could look like you're making progress, that the organization is moving forward, especially when it comes to sustainability reporting time. If your organization is issuing an impact statement or a sustainability statement, and people can feed into that statement, but it actually is really fragile, and it's kind of a one-off thing, and it takes a lot of work, and it's more of a communications exercise than anything to make it sound like a cohesive path forward, and it certainly isn't a risk management approach. So here's where the problem starts, where all this kind of disparate work turns into risk for an organization. When ESG is vague and it's spread across so many functions, ESG risk decisions rely heavily on individual judgment. People will explain things from memory. They won't necessarily have evidence, certainly not in one place. And if there's gaps, they're being filled in on an ad hoc and reactive basis. And you can manage an organization this way until somebody asks a more detailed question. And eventually somebody does. Usually that is provoked by something a stakeholder is asking, or the board is asking, or a customer is asking. And it's actually at a moment of critical importance. But it means that the company scrambles. Then when you're scrambling, this lack of ESG structure turns into a lot of pressure. And as someone who has worked in sustainability and ESG for a long time, a lot of that pressure usually lands on one person. It can be a very stressful experience if you are an ESG manager or a sustainability manager who's managing ESG. It can be a lot of pressure on you. And I hear so many people in this field who talk about burnout because it's so much to do and it can be so stressful. And when these sorts of issues come around, it can be very difficult to understand, how do you even begin to answer that question, and who do I ask within my organization who owns this? That's why ESG risk often feels so personal, and it can feel like almost like you can feel like you have career risk just by managing the ESG risks in your organization. It's avoidable though. It's exhausting, but it is avoidable. So here is the key reframe for your company. Stop thinking about ESG as a collection of issues or ESG factors or a collection of impacts and targets. Start thinking about ESG as risk. So put your risk lens onto it. Think about ESG is a set of risks, and you can then start to assess ESG as things that could possibly go wrong. What happens if there's any exposure on any of these issues? Who owns these issues? What evidence do we have that we are identifying our risk, assessing our vulnerability, managing that risk, and continually monitoring how this is going throughout the organization? It will entirely shift your company's perspective on risk. It's no longer about ideal targets and a direction that you want to go in. This is about how you manage from day to day across your organization. I want to be clear. My personal perspective is that we don't have to have everything solved at once. Just like risk management in other areas, we're not looking necessarily to have everything like risk at zero out of, if you measured your uncertainty level from 0 to 100, with 0 being no uncertainty and 100 being like, oh my God, the alarm bells are going off. It's so uncertain. What's going to happen tomorrow? To be successful, you don't have to be at a 0, meaning like you don't have to have eliminated every risk. What you do want is to have clarity and have insight, knowing what risks matter most to your organization, where the responsibility for managing those risks sit, what is documented, and what is still in progress. And when those things are clear, then conversations become easier. They're calmer. They can be proactive because you can speak to things that still need to get done, and then you can have a better conversation about resources and budgeting. People stop guessing. You have much better quality of data, and you have much less stress. If you are managing that process, then you don't have to fear these nasty surprises. So again, like today, I really want to hone in on ESG can be seen as a risk lens, as a risk management approach, and that the goal is clarity rather than a target of some sort, or rather than elimination of all of the risks. In the next episode, I'm going to talk about what ESG risk maturity really looks like and why maturity, well, what it is, and why maturity brings stability rather than complexity. If this episode was valuable to you, hit the subscribe button. And if you know a colleague who's struggling with unclear ESG expectations, then share this with them. Thank you so much for listening.